have this thing on Tuesday nights where I downloaded sound bites.
Mhm.
So one of them is when someone releases a really good song. I have like air horns and stuff.
Mhm.
But there's one that's just like a nuclear siren that's like, meh, meh,
What kind of song gets a nuclear siren?
Well, a Boppenheimer.
God.
Dude, people were going nuts the other day. I was like, uh-oh, is this one a Boppenheimer, y'all? And they're like,
Oh my God. Do you have to evacuate?
so
if
it's like,
not
I
good?
press the Boppenheimer, it goes, and then I hit this explosion. It goes,
Wow. And then you guys all just have to disappear off screen and be like, it was that good. It killed everyone. Is that dark?
I gotta have
That's a little dark.
no, I have to have an animation where it's like it's melting, and then it's
yeah.
it's
That's hilarious.
it's too much work. I think the sound effects was
Oppenheimer.
as far as I'll go.
All right, Chad. Hello, Chad.
Hi, Val. How's it going? Look, here's the deal, Val. I woke up today, and
I don't know if I woke up today.
yeah,
I'll start there. I don't know if I woke up today.
you're the nice intersection of zany and delirious.
Silly. Okay, yes. Anyways,
for those of you who are not watching us on a visual media,
you should do that.
She has a beach ball cup.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
This is the podcast lore is that Jose, who's off camera producing our lovely podcast, brought me a fun cup because one of the first times we filmed, you had a really fun cup. And then I got a little jealous because I didn't have a fun cup prepared. So.
And now I didn't bring a fun cup, but I did find one in my...
Yeah, you do have a fun cup.
So for those of you not watching, this is a special collector's cup from the Brownies and Valerie, Brownies and Lemonade Valorant event we did the other night, which was fun.
Which I particularly love the name of that.
Of course.
It's my name.
Yes. Anything that, inflates your vanity, you're down with.
Damn. All right. Take a sip out of my beach ball cup for that. Ooh.
But here in the music world and electronic DJ world, everyone's so soft. We're the Gerber baby food people.
Damn.
Yeah. You gotta just be very careful about everything.
It's true.
Say.
That's why it's so funny when DJs have beef because it's like soft, tender beef.
I know. It's like Wagyu. That is an interesting thing. I guess if we're segueing into more of a music conversation I've noticed about beef in electronic music.
Why do I want to scream the lyrics to the 303 song?
I'm a vegetarian, and I feel
like that's a little scared of him. That's how that goes. Chad, did you forget?
Cue the beep sound effect, which sometimes comes in on this podcast, but not always.
Sometimes I forget to put it in, honestly. So, we're making it work.
For those of you who don't know, Valerie, Jose, and myself, shout out Jose, our producer, who's making it all work right now.
Invisible producer.
We edit the podcast ourselves and the clips.
We're DIY.
So if you sometimes hear us say a very clear expletive and then a minute later you hear a beep,
just forget about it. Just pretend like it didn't happen.
Who cares?
Who cares?
Although you were warned on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, it should have a big E next to this title.
Yeah, because we're a mature podcast for mature people.
With a beach ball cup.
Okay. Anyways, were you gonna say something about?
I was talking about EDM
dance
beef.
Music beef.
Yeah, it's really funny because beef is a great way to promote something, right? It's an amazing way to promote something. Oh, you mean
like calculated or not calculated, like accidental beef?
Well, I mean, there is the calculated beef, which something that comes to mind because rap is like the most obvious, like scene in place where well actually this was back in 2007. Kanye West and 50 Cent had an album. They had albums coming out on the same day, and it was like this whoever gets the most record sales on the first day promotion. They were kind of trying to do like a Barbenheimer kind of thing, but it ended up not working out in 50 Cent's favor. He was very much like Kanye sold X amount of times, but it was it was so manufactured. I felt I don't know if they liked each other or not. I'm pretty sure they had a decent relationship.
Yeah.
But then unintentional beef is like when Drake and Pusha T were doing freestyle, and then Pusha T's like, oh wait, no, Drake has a kid. It's like
Yeah.
And he's a bad father.
And that was
and then
definitely
people were like,
not planned.
whoa, okay.
Yeah, and everyone was like, secret child.
I think that kind of like, I mean, obviously it helped both of them. Like,
Yeah.
everyone was talking about it, but I think that, I don't think Pusha T was promoting anything.
No, I don't think he was promoting anything in that instance.
And so in EDM, we're all about promotion. And I think that it just, people have talked like, there should be more beef because, like, whenever there's just a little bit of stuff, like, you hear people's names like John Summit and stuff.
Yeah.
And because it's always associated with something controversial. And
yes, that's true.
Makes great music.
Yeah.
Is a tremendous, figure musically, but also you hear about the extracurricular stuff, the interpersonal sort of, tension and stuff online. So
yeah, well, now you have me thinking about. I mean, you brought up John Summit because I guess that's like the recent big beef was that he accidentally got himself into hot water. I would say with the event that shared the same name as his label, right? And I'm thinking about, like, when you're saying dance music is soft, it is kind of funny because it really was like, it's just like misplaced silliness a lot of the time. Like, I feel like the beef that dance music gets into is just like, what are we actually fighting about here? Like, which is funny because it's kind of the same with rap, but I don't know why it feels different, right? Like,
yeah, I mean, one that comes to mind also was this Excision Getter sort of dust up where they were talking about ghost producers. And
hot topic.
he like called out a particular artist who had ghost produced for Excision and was like, oh, he doesn't get his credit.
Yeah.
But then he came out and said, like, all the people who produced with me are, given credit, but Getter was claiming that there were like NDAs involved, and that's what there's just like this whole thing, and I'm like, this is the beef? Like, we're talking about, like, these kind of behind the scenes practices in electronic music that kind of everyone knows but doesn't. That's where it gets weird because, like, the fans have a decent amount of like a veil, that and I don't know sometimes if like calling someone out for having a ghost producer is really like the biggest moral quandary that we should be.
Well, that's why I'm kind of thinking about it because I'm trying to figure out in my head even. I'm like, well, what's the difference? Because it's true. It's like across, like, you compare rap to dance music, the debates are not that different in like silliness levels, but I think one thing that dance music does to itself is like, we're a funny genre, right? Because we're kind of the black sheep of music genres. Like, we're always kind of the underdog. It's not as big as hip hop or pop or even rock or something like that with legacy. And then at the same time, both the fans and the artists kind of get stuck in this like halfway where like we know we're kind of like unprofessional and like that's just kind of how it is because it is DIY a little in some ways. But then like sometimes people get pulled into thinking like, oh, it should be done this way. Like, there shouldn't be ghost producers or like we shouldn't have those discussions or something like that. And then I feel like that's what happens where we're fighting about things where we're like, ghost producers are very common, I think, across not just dance music, across many different types of music. I mean, also like,
no, you're totally right. I mean, like, there's a ton of stuff about, like, even in rap, like Lil Wayne. That I've watched videos where it's like, here's Lil Wayne swagger jacking like this amount of artists. Or, I remember in the VMAs, Lil Wayne's height, he did this like freestyle rap over one of his songs. I think it was like Misunderstood or whatever when he came out. And it was the exact same verse that Drake had on one of his mixtapes. So it's like, oh, Drake wrote that for him. It's like, it's not crazy. Like, obviously Lil Wayne co-signed Drake, and then there you have that artist. So I know I'm mentioning rap a lot here. That's usually the model in which we're kind of like comparing these things to. But because, like you're saying, it feels like dance music is a less serious, less official sort of genre. It's not in the pantheon of like, no one is like talking about the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and then talking about dance music residents in Vegas in the same breath. Like, we're just, I think that it, unfortunately, the pinnacle of dance music, the highest highs, is just like not even anywhere close to where a lot of, people see music. So,
yeah, which is really interesting because I feel like you think about, we've had efforts made where we've tried to kind of get into the same league as other genres. Like we've tried to do the electronic music awards, which came and went kind
Is
of
that
quickly, you know?
Oh, yeah, I thought
You remember that?
I saw that there was an electronic music awards in Miami this year that they have still been doing.
A separate one, a different one.
But see, I don't know what there's
The fact
different
that I didn't even know what it was.
You know, it's I actually told one of the artists, ISOXO, I was like, "Did you know that you were nominated for Best New Artist?" He's like, "Oh, that's cool." I was like, "Okay."
Okay, so anyways, whatever variety of electronic
anyway,
music awards have come and gone, as we can tell. Some less
Well, and
successful
also
than
no one
others.
actually thinks that the Grammys Best Dance Music Awards really are ever indicative of
And
the
they actually made a change this year that I think will hopefully move us in the right direction, because the Recording Academy and the Grammy stuff is very complicated, and I know some of it, but I feel like I couldn't even do a really good job of explaining it. So we should have a guest come and explain that one
Good.
time.
Yeah.
But there's always been a lot of controversy, as we know, because the dance category for many years was always infiltrated by pop, where, someone like a Lady Gaga or a Beyonce could release a dance album and then win the category against actual dance artists, therefore leaving dance artists with nowhere else to go or no awards to win. And so that's been an issue that's happened for a long time. We saw it this past year because Beyonce released Renaissance, and very house music driven. So then, of course, it won those categories. And they actually made a change this year where they separated and actually made their own category for pop dance. I believe I'm saying that correctly. I could be saying it wrong, but basically separating it so that those kind of records can have their own place, and then actual dance electronic artists and albums can keep their own genre or category. So
Yeah.
I think that's a good move.
I think that's totally fair. I mean, usually you'll have those like juggernaut crossovers, like obviously when Daft Punk won that one year, you're like, that's guaranteed for the genre category, but then they won album of the year. And that happens a lot of times with hip hop. One that comes to mind is like Outkast. Speaker Box Love Below was like the juggernaut. Lauryn Hill, the juggernaut that year. And so, that's just the Grammys. But I think with dance music, we're seeing that hip hop just celebrated its 50th anniversary about a week ago. And dance music, depending on who you ask, the origin, but it's about roughly, about 40 years or so or less. But I really think like we have to consider it's tough, right? Because you have like the Giorgio Moroder kind of like disco stuff, and you have Kraftwerk and this but I think that dance music as we know it now, we can really, I think, attribute to, I want to say the late 80s and into like, like just kind of what we consider dance music now, and then how people are identifying it, like the rave stuff, and it's so new. Like it's just like incredibly new.
Yeah.
And I think this next generation, this current generation is the one, because like we've said before, they've grown up with this stuff throughout in America. That it will then be commonplace. It'll be a commonplace genre by the time that they're in their 30s or 40s, and then their kids are. It's not weird to go to a rave,
Yeah.
When I was in high school, it was extremely not cool to go to a rave.
Definitely the alternative thing to do. Yeah.
Yeah,
exactly.
It was like kind of like you. It was very like almost in line with like you also played Dungeons and Dragons, or like. Like you brought glow sticks to prom.
Yeah.
I'm not even kidding. Like,
did you bring glow sticks to
prom?
No,
I'm just saying, like, there's kids who brought glow sticks to prom.
Don't lie.
Shout out to my boy Brian, who brought 2 dates to prom. That was very controversial.
My mouth is hanging open in shock.
One on either arm.
Oh, so they knew.
Yeah.
So they knew. Oh,
no,
I thought you meant
but
like
it was
he
like,
secretly brought.
No, he brought 2. He brought 2 dates on either arm to prom.
Shout out Brian. He had the Riz before Riz was Riz.
Our assistant principal, Miss Monroe, did not like that. Her face was very, very mortified. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting to see the growth from that was like 2005, 2006. How not cool it was to go to raves. You were going to like Together as One.
Yeah.
And seeing like, just it was Eurodance kind of stuff, and stuff like that. I don't know if
Yeah.
you had the same kind of.
Oh, definitely. I mean, I feel like I lived in an area where I wasn't even close enough to a city for it to be like even the alternative kids were really going. I think right when I was graduating, some people did start going to like the EDCs, and I was like, "Whoa, that's crazy!" Like, I didn't. I was like, that looks wild." But I think you're right, and it's interesting to point that out too, because I think the other part of dance music being behind in a way is that it's really global and therefore really different and like fragmented, because in Europe they kind of are maybe like 10, 20 years ahead of us, I would say, where I remember having that distinct experience where I went and you would see like middle-aged people at the rave, and it was like very normal. They were just going because like
Yeah.
they grew up with that music. And I think you're
Yeah.
right. I think unfortunately we're going to be those middle-aged people at the
I know.
rave.
Well, I mean, I remember I went to like Avalon in like 2010 or 11 maybe, and it was like Bob Sinclair on a Saturday. Like Saturday at Avalon back in the day used to get real
Crazy.
dark. No, because like they
Real
would stay
dark.
open really late. I think they would stay open till like 6 or 7. People would stay after.
Oh.
And
Gremlin hours.
oh man, there's just like I was at Bob Sinclair, and there's like a ton of like Vietnamese folk like in their 50s just like ripping cigs. Like I was like, damn, okay, they know about this culture.
They're
like,
going
so
in.
I felt like I was behind.
Yeah.
Like
fair.
maybe people had grown up with discotheques and stuff like that. To me it was the newest, like it being cool was like super new to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would say yeah, and we talk about that a lot. So my point, I guess, bringing it back to the whole thing is that like having beef and like having like cool style and this is like a new,
very new.
Like these are all extensions of social media, I feel like, more so.
And like the popification
or the DJs becoming actual recognized stars or artists or figures that have some sort of like their opinions and their voice has some sort of value in the culture. Because and I'm interested to hear, because of your journalism background, but one of the things I was mentioning recently to someone is that DJs talking direct to consumer, like on their social media, and actually even just talking, like people want to hear what they have to say, is a very new thing.
Yeah.
Now, rappers and vocalists, their music is their voice.
Yes.
So it's very imbued. So when you hear Cardi B's voice on a record, her personality,
and she's saying something.
Like, or even if you just heard her music, you would be like, oh, I get a feel for like what she's like. You know?
And like who she is, sort of thing. No, you're totally right. Because as you were saying that, I was racking my brain trying to figure out. I was like, okay, who was really the first modern day dance music star? And I was kind of thinking, I was like, we actually had a couple, but I feel like they were more in line with what dance music was, in that they were a bit weird, right? Like we had Daft Punk, who were stars, but then they didn't say anything. They were faceless, so that's one version of a star. And then I feel like we had the Deadmau5, who was a star, had his iconic look, but then Deadmau5 is Deadmau5 and, says whatever he wants, pisses people off, and doesn't really care. So that was also very like, okay, you're that kind of a star.
I think in between to that point, like, you had like Tiesto. I think it's like a very, and that is just because like, again, it goes back to this thing, was like, that's what people said was a DJ.
Yes.
But it was always European.
Yeah.
No sauce.
Yeah, and I feel like he was for sure a star. Hits, was beloved by people, but I feel like he definitely took the approach of not saying anything for years, right?
Yeah,
like he was just the star. It
was always like the smiling, like the
just happy to be there, which like I think he did such a good job, because he truly was everywhere and still is kind of everywhere.
Yeah.
And we've had a couple stars similarly do the same thing. Like I even feel like, like the Aviciis and the Calvin Harrises, like when that was the era, they were stars for sure. Like Calvin Harris was doing like Calvin Klein campaigns, but they also weren't really super vocal or like personality forward stars, I would say.
Yeah,
they
not
were
so
really
much.
focused on making just hits.
Well, also Calvin Harris himself, he came from an indie disco rock kind of area. Like his first records, Acceptable in the 80s, and I Invented Disco, all that stuff. It's obviously very different. Anyone who was around then.
Very good.
Yeah, a very modern figure that I think changed the culture and what we're talking about is probably Diplo. That was one of the people who I felt like his celebrity and his personality preceded even him as a musician. Like people were aware of him as a personality in a very mainstream way more than even like the records that he had made. And then, that goes into like another topic, but about, the artist and art.
Yeah.
But I guess like it is interesting when I think about how we digest these artists' personalities, or like we create the image of them in our head. A lot of it was me reading blogs and reading articles.
Because Instagram and TikTok didn't exist, but Instagram wasn't as big.
Yeah, or maybe you heard their voice on like maybe they had a radio program. Like if you like Scream and Benga, or you liked, you liked Pete Tong, or like these figures, you would hear their voices.
Yeah.
And maybe you would hear like a sound like, hey guys, what's up? It's so and so. This is my essential mix. But you didn't really need, I don't think you needed a lot more for the artist to have to explain. So that's what makes it really interesting about like, why do people have to have so much of their voice represented now, so much of their personality? And is that more valuable than the music, really? Because like because there's definitely been that shift in the last 10, 15 years.
Yeah.
But I literally remember only reading articles of people's quotes, and I would imagine what their voice sounded like. And I don't think I needed anything more back in like the early 2010s. Like, that was, I don't know if you had a similar experience, but someone would release a record, I would read the article, I'd be like, sick, dope. And then I'd listen to it, and then I would interpret kind of their whole art, because for electronic music, like they're not speaking or singing on it.
Right. Yeah, no, I think you're right. Because honestly, I mean, I know we've talked about these topics often, but I feel like I'm having the experience of racking my own brain currently and thinking about like, oh yeah, that is how I experience, like even blogging, like when people would upload stuff on SoundCloud. Like at that point, the Instagrams and stuff did exist, but I feel like it didn't matter as much. Like you truly were just like, I really like this sound. I'm into this vibe that they're making. And slowly we started getting more involved in like, okay, like this is, their influence or what they're interested in or what they're trying to say and all that kind of stuff. But I think you're so right. I think Diplo was kind of the first of the dance genre to realize the power in getting people's attention with his personality and just being like kind of ridiculous. A little, very extra.
And kind of like straight up responding to like clowns and being like, yeah, you suck, or like whatever. And you're like, whoa, you could do that?
Yeah. And just like, and now I'm like having the flashback of, it's so funny. I mean, Diplo has had so much craziness attached to his name, but like the era of, God, what was like, he was just reposting girls twerking for like 2 years straight. Like that was his marketing.
Totally. And the early Twitter, like, I mean, obviously anyone can respond to any tweet now.
Yeah.
But those DJs felt so accessible. Like, that was when I think people started to realize, like, oh my God, like, like he just responded to my tweet.
Yeah.
I didn't think that like actually people were reading this criticism or like reading this like these like shit posts.
Yeah.
But now we take that for granted. Now it's like, oh, now it's encouraged to almost talk to the fans on their level.
Yeah, and I guess what you were saying before about, is it more valuable? I feel like when you say that, I'm like, oh, obviously not. But then you're like, well, I guess maybe for the average music fan, if I try and remove myself from someone who has spent a lot of time being like a music thinker, talking and like, analyzing stuff in the music industry, something we talked to Wookie about where he pointed out, he was like, a lot of people are just fans. Like they listen to it in the gym, they listen to it in passing, or if their friend shows them something cool, and they maybe actually don't really know that much about artists and like who people are and all the controversies that they're involved in. So in a way, it's like the top line of what people are putting out there as their personality can also now catch those people's attention, right? It's like, so if you're just maybe if you're just a frat star who likes fun music, but then you see John Summit also parties at the frats, you're like, I relate.
Yeah.
I relate to him.
Yeah.
I love him. And that's all you need to know. So, like, that works. I think that's cool for some people, but I think it's harder because, like, the more invested you get into the genre and the people who take up space in the genre, the more I guess you have feelings about things that they're saying or doing
Right.
and the way that they give back to the community or get involved in the community. So,
Well, I mean,
it's hard.
there's this misconception that everything in I'm sure this applies to almost every field, but especially like on dance music Twitter, like that it has to be earned by merit, and there's like an order to how things go, and you go and you like go to the next level, and people don't like it when you skip steps. I know this for a fact.
Interesting.
Behind the scenes, especially when I talk to other artists, and they're like, dude, he's like doing this venue. Like
So
he
would
like
an
skipped that
example
venue and now he's doing Shrine or
Right, would an example of that be like, I don't know, maybe if you were like a TikTok artist and you didn't play the small shows and then all of a sudden you're maybe opening for someone really big at a big venue. Like
Yeah,
people get
totally.
upset by that. Yeah.
I think there's a lot of people that feel like you didn't earn. You have to earn it. You have to earn your stripes. You have to go through the same
struggles.
Yeah. You have to go step by step.
Yeah.
So people don't like it when you skip steps.
Yeah.
John Summit has skipped a lot of steps. But he's been around for a while. So like that's the thing that a lot of people don't recognize. It's like, dude, it takes like 8 years to become an overnight celebrity,
Yeah.
And it's like, I don't lob any criticisms at someone like John Summit as much as other people, because I feel like he has an archetype, like you're saying,
Yeah.
for the frat culture.
Yeah.
It's like, doesn't Fisher like kind of have a similar archetype? Like, isn't he one of the biggest artists in the world? Isn't this just like the same model that's just always going to be there?
Yeah, and I think the interesting part about that, about you bringing up like skipping steps, is also I think that's the catch-22 maybe of getting a lot of success for having a strong image or brand or controversial things you're saying, because then you're also making those mistakes. Like everyone makes mistakes. No one ever says all the right things or does all the right things. Like that's just a human, fact. So it's like when you start to gain a really big audience and then you do have a mistake, I feel like it hits a lot harder than, maybe if you're smaller and you're like, oh, I realize that like some people didn't like that or some trolls start finding it or whatever. But
Yeah.
I think that's also difference, is that now things just feel a bit more large at scale. Like there's so many more people watching all the time if you're trying to do something, in this genre, in this space. So
Well, it's interesting because, and it's something that we talked with Medicine about. If you haven't listened to the Medicine episode, go back. It's a banger.
Yeah.
Where he was like, back in the day, I used to care when X DJ would share me on their stories, or when the EDM beef about this stuff like was really serious, right? And now later on in growth and in maturity, it doesn't matter. It doesn't mean anything to them. And it's like, oh, that's cool, but or oh, that's annoying, but it's not life changing.
Yeah.
And I think now that I'm in that space, I'm kind of on the other end of it. I look at what John Summit's doing, and I think a lot of it is around the bender stuff and like the partying stuff.
Yeah.
And as someone who's almost 5 years alcohol free, like I don't really have a problem with it, because I'm like, it's just so imbued in the culture. Like someone's going to be the poster child for the debauchery of this scene. Like, are we supposed to expect that like you play Splash House and no one drinks any alcohol? Like, to me, it just feels like disingenuous that like everyone has to adhere to a moral code that isn't unanimous for everyone.
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting thing too, because I think about this a lot actually outside of just dance music and more in the pop space, I would say, because I mean, I feel like everything we're talking about just gets amplified times 50 with pop stars. Like I think of someone like a Doja Cat, like right now she's like talk of the town because she's kind of going quote unquote off the rails and like just saying weird stuff, dressing really strange, and people are like, why are you doing this? Like, and it makes me think of all the weird expectations that we put on pop stars or musicians who reach a certain level of fame, because it's like they're just people, they're just people who are really creative and have a sort of talent that they've shared. But especially with like, now I'm talking about pop stars, I'm talking about like female pop stars, we expect them to be like really talented, but then also be someone to look up to, like a role model for other women, and then also be, a spokesperson for being a woman in rap in her case or something like that. When it's like, it's a lot to put on someone,
Yeah.
and it's
Yeah.
like, who's to say? We've again had many conversations about this. When you're a creative and you're an artist, a lot of the times you work on, the music that you put out, you reach some sort of audience, but then you realize like, I'm not going to do this forever. Like, I'm going to change, I'm going to grow. You have to kind of go away and experience some stuff and then come back with like more great music. So it's a really interesting thing that we put on people. And I guess bringing it back to dance music, I always think to myself, I'm like, what are the expectations we're putting on these stars? Like, do we expect John Summit to be a role model? Because, like, I think that's the funny question I always have to myself when I'm like watching these conversations go down. Like, we all feel a certain way about whatever he's saying, but like, I don't pretend that he's supposed to be a role model for
No,
anyone.
and
You know
yeah,
what I
that
mean?
is the
Like,
interesting part.
yeah,
Is that I agree with what you're saying.
yeah,
I think I can say it because I'm like at this particular point in my life,
yeah,
that I don't really look up to any of these people. But I can't say that the same was true when I was 19.
for sure.
And
Yes, and that's what I try and remember as well. Yeah.
yeah, but then I I think a lot of it just becomes like this thing because like you're saying, like Diplo had the same sort of criticisms, I'm sure, back in his heyday when he was coming up and saying
Hmm.
things and posting things.
Yeah.
And really, you have to really ask yourself, like, are dance music DJs the role models that we should be sort of putting on a pedestal and
Mm.
using as a template for our moral conduct? It's like I don't think that that's a good area to look for role models. I think you could just
Mm.
enjoy them for being. It's like, hey, he's got a couple great songs.
Right.
Hey, I heard Where You Are in the Lobby when we walked in today. I was like, great,
And
good
he's a hit
song.
maker. We
Yeah.
can't deny it.
I
Like,
don't I'm not thinking about
yeah.
like sort of like the impact of like this person's, judgment or, beyond like a certain point of like being a monster or someone who is actually like destructive, but like
Mm.
I don't really think anyone should be looked up to in any way at all.
I mean, I
You
will
know?
say I think there's certain folks, if we're just talking about the dance music genre, I think that there's certain people that spend a lot of effort in their own time, and then also in the public sphere choose to speak out on behalf of, whether it's you're a woman, whether you're a person of color, and they like want to speak about that, which is very important and should be done. And I think like in that case, yes, like look towards this person for the efforts and the thoughts that they're putting into, whether it's their work or conversations that they're having or people they surround themselves with, because that stuff is really important. But for the artists that don't choose to do that,
Yeah. Yeah.
and to be honest, when you get to a certain level, it does become a bit of an active choice to, and I'm not saying that like, every famous DJ has to speak, about diversity or whatever it is, but it's like you have a platform. So they have the opportunity to pick and choose what they do put out there.
Yeah.
And if they don't choose to do that, then like, do we put that expectation on them? That's like an interesting thing, because
Well,
it's
no,
like,
that's yeah.
yeah,
No, finish the thought. Finish
yeah,
the
because
thought.
I do think that like, yes, I agree. I would love it if more, especially like men, like white men, were out there, you know, bringing awareness or bringing up other, whether it's other artists or communities or whatnot. But like, you can't necessarily, I guess, expect all of them to do that. But yeah,
Yeah. Well,
yeah,
that's true because that was one of the things that I think in sort of like a post Me Too, sort of post George Floyd, BLM sort of
mm,
world where we were expecting, like, we saw a lot of humanity and a lot of reality come out of a lot of these figures getting canceled
hmm,
or, getting called out. And, I think it was like it was a real awakening for a lot of people. Like,
yeah,
oh, okay, I need to behave like this, or like I have a platform, like this is how I should use it. But on the other, like when we saw like so many of these posts from DJs, like,
Yeah.
a white bro kind of like
Just
trying to
saying
talk on
it.
some of these
Yeah.
issues, like I do think it was important, but I also felt like I don't know if this is why anyone
Mm.
is coming to this person's, at the time it was important, but I think going forward, it's like I'm not expecting that person to be a figure for social justice. Like I just don't think
Yeah.
that they have the capacity to actually do that the right way.
Well, I think the other interesting part of that is that I don't. Because here, it's tough, right? Because like I hear that and I'm like, well, at the same time, I of course like appreciate that they've tried, but at the same time, I'm disappointed that it was only just the one time at the certain
The David
time when it
Guetta getting on the
right,
mic.
like when it felt like everyone was doing the post, so they were
Yeah,
sitting
yeah,
at that there were some people sitting there going like, oh snap, I gotta do my post, otherwise people are gonna think that I don't support it, and then that's the
yeah,
last time they ever thought about it, and that's
yeah.
not great. It's not the worst, but it's not great. But it is one of those things where I think like actions speak louder than words. I think it's one thing to say the tweet when everyone else is tweeting it, but it's another thing to, again, when you rise up to a certain level, you have a platform, like you
Mhm.
choose the people that you work with or you bring up with you. And I will say that, like, Diplo, there's many things to say about him and the many things that he says and stuff, but I think that there's ways that he has taken some actions. I'm not saying he's done the perfect job, but like, he brings up other artists with him. Like, I think of, like, someone like a Luna, like, that she's on his, like, Higher Ground lineups all the time, and, like, she's someone who's, like, such a great spokesperson and speaks so clearly and, like, loudly about things that she believes in, and, like, I think that's great that he is bringing more audience to her, more visibility to her, doing things like that.
Yeah, and that
Yeah.
is something that I think consistently throughout his career he's done.
Yeah.
I can say that.
Yeah.
The platform thing is really interesting. I
Yeah.
think us becoming aware of that word is an
Mm.
interesting thing.
Mhm.
Um, like the platform thing I think is the main issue. I think
Yeah.
people feel like that people should speak on these things, or they should maintain a certain level of moral conduct because of the platform. Like
Mm.
you've become we've made you famous, so now make sure that you stick within the parameters of this,
Mhm.
or else we're going to take you off the platform.
Yeah.
And I've actually I've seen people who got accused of some misconduct and they literally put out a statement. Usually it'll be
In
a
the Notes
iPhone
app.
notes app, and it's like, I'm deplatforming. And
Oh.
then
Wait, they said that?
I've literally seen a few artists who are like,
Oh,
I'm deplatforming, and then they've left, they're gone,
they're gone.
which I find like very interesting. Like it
Mm.
even if you had, like, one of the artists had like like maybe like a couple thousand followers, and
Mhm.
then they were deplatforming. So a platform is very
Mm.
subjective now.
Mm.
It's very like I that's why I kind of like I shudder to think about, like, getting up in arms about, John Summit's platform, which is maybe a couple 100,000 people,
Yeah.
or what. And then Kyrie Irving, like, we're talking about two different things,
Mm.
like,
Mhm.
we're like, the platforms are like, this dude's got an elevator and this
Mm.
guy's like just like right here on a box crate.
Mm.
I'm just thinking about, like, in this day and age, we're almost unable to separate the artist from their art. And
Mm.
I think that's
Yeah.
what we were talking about as like a through line in this conversation. But it is really interesting how, like, on every level people are so conscious about, the way that they're going to be received
Yeah.
more than their music will be received. And I find that quite interesting. I don't necessarily know if I have an opinion on it. I just find it
Yeah.
a curious side effect of this
Yeah,
age.
I think I feel like one thing I took away again from our conversation with medicine was that when we were having these kind of interesting debates, I feel like he often would sit there and be like, "Actually, I don't know if it is good or bad. It just is the state of how it is." And I
Yeah.
actually feel like that's kind of what it is. Because I agree. I mean, like, we can easily point out what's bad about becoming famous for your art and then being subjected to all of your actions being judged by everyone. Like, there's plenty bad about that on either side. But I don't necessarily agree that it shouldn't be that way, because it's like these people do get so much power and persuasion in the things that they decide to publicize or put themselves behind. So it's like, yeah, we should hold them a little accountable. I think we have to be a little realistic with ourselves sometimes and be like, okay, is that person going to be like the high moral standards, like we said, of whatever it is? Probably not. But
Yeah. Well, I mean, I
yeah,
understand like with streamers and YouTubers,
yeah.
their personality and their whole image is their art,
Mm,
and a lot of them have fans that are children,
right.
and so I get that, and with music, it's the same way. Any person of any age most of the time can listen to these artists.
Yeah.
So you don't know how old your fan base is, but I do feel like there was a clear separation of art and artist, that has in time become more blurred, and now is almost like had an inverse effect where now it's
Mm.
people are discovering the artist's personality and their image or their brand,
Mm-hmm.
and then the music is kind of like a byproduct of that. So
Yeah.
I can understand why someone would get offended or disappointed or really really hurt if like someone that they discovered through those means, who is like their identity is tied to what they start dressing like the artist, or
Mm.
they start becoming interested in certain issues because this
Mm-hmm.
person was talking about them, this DJ, you know, and then they turn out to be a shitty person. Like I can understand why it would be really disappointing.
Yeah.
And we've all had to have that kind of conversation with ourselves, internally in the last couple of years, when certain people that I'm sure we liked
Yeah.
got canceled,
For sure.
But
Yeah.
it is super interesting to me because one example is Michael Jordan in the Last Dance documentary.
Yeah.
He took a lot of heat because he didn't really take a clear political stance in his playing career. And there was this one quote that he had that says, "Republicans buy sneakers too." And it's a very famous quote.
Yeah.
And that was kind of like the mentality back in the day, is like you didn't take a clear political social stance on anything because it was like,
Because he's a businessman at
right,
that
you're going
point.
to lose like 50% of your
Yeah,
audience.
exactly.
But now what I've seen in studies is that millennials and Gen Z feel apprehensive about supporting a brand or a figure if their political or social affiliation is not overt or like very clear and communicated.
Right.
And that, I think, for at least us running a brand and for a lot of artists, I think has been a huge shift in making sure that that is actually very clear from day one.
Totally.
Have you seen kind of like a similar thing, in that evolution?
Oh my God, of course. I mean, I feel like that's just such a cultural thing that we've just experienced with like political divide becoming just something that no one can not think about, you
Yeah.
know? So, yeah, like I feel like, again, when we were growing up, becoming like fans of whether it was musicians, sports athletes, or whatnot, I just remember never thinking about it. Like it just what never even came up, like who
Yeah.
someone voted for or like what they believed in or anything like that. But I feel like now it's just become such a touch point for people. And yeah, I think like again, art is so it draws people in such a way, that like they feel so tied and passionate to like whatever the art is that they're drawn to, that now they have to get it cleared up because it's like otherwise it's gonna
Right.
devastate them.
Well, ambiguity is like a huge thing too. Like
Yeah.
if like, people say, "Oh, like you haven't said anything yet." Taylor Swift was drawing a lot
Yep.
of ire over the last couple of years, where it's like she never said anything about politics.
Mhm.
And so recently, in the last couple of years, she's gotten very, very vocal about,
Mhm.
campaigning for people and
Yeah.
stuff. And
Yeah.
it's a huge, like, that's a huge shift in our
Yeah.
culture. I don't know if you remember when there was the Hurricane Katrina live stream, fundraiser, a telethon, and Kanye West said George Bush doesn't care about black people on national television.
Of course, I remember that.
Not only did that cause a huge uproar amongst,
Yeah.
people who were supporting George Bush, but like there was a lot of conversation about how you couldn't actually say that about the president. Like
Mm.
there was like a etiquette like where you weren't actually allowed to say that. It was very inflammatory in that context to say something so it's really interesting that now is like tame, like like it's just like our own
Compared to other
presidents
stuff
are
that
firing
Kanye
off
West
the
has
most
said.
like inflammatory
Yeah.
things, and so it's really interesting that when you see like I see this a lot when someone is like, like when a DJ or someone is talking about like maybe they're saying, hey, you should get boosted, or like they're wearing a mask in a photo, and then you see the comments where people are like, keep your politics out of my music, man. It's just like that person feels like they're living in a totally different decade. Like just like
which there's a whole history to talk about that I don't even think we can fit into this conversation about dance music, like hip hop, different in many ways, but like hip hop has always been tied to, political, socio-cultural issues at hand. And it may not be so direct as in hip hop with lyrics that you're actually just, saying out loud, but whether it's like the actual artist and like how they were releasing music or the people that they were playing to or the venues that they had to go to in order to play their music, like all of that stuff is so tied into it. And of course, I know now there are some artists who are like so many steps removed from that at this point that like maybe that doesn't feel like those are the fans where they're like keep your politics out of my music or whatnot. But like it's important to remember that like that's part of the culture as well.
Yeah, I have a question for you. This is an interesting one that I think you and I can speak on because we're both Asian American. But there was like the Stop Asian Hate movement, and then a lot of Asian American figures were coming out, this was like a couple years ago, with like posts about like their heritage or like things that they've experienced in their lives, like microaggressions or actual hate crimes and stuff. And I don't know if you remember this kind of part, but like for me, like it felt like really, I was at like kind of like a crossroads because, at one hand I was like, this is great that like people are shedding light on some of the stories or experiences that, I've had or my family members have had or my friends have had. And then I kind of like shared a post about like what I've done in the Japanese American community and with like my Buddhist temple and stuff. But I've been posting this stuff for years, but like for this one finally started to get a lot of traction. But then I was like, it's not like the bigots are liking this post. You know what I'm saying? I'm like, I just feel like it's a lot of the people who already know me or agree that like we should stop Asian hate. So that was for me a tough part. I don't know if you felt a similar way when there is like, it's like your community is like having its moment, and then and then you have to speak on it. Like I didn't know if like I needed to speak on it in that way. Like I feel like there's like a time and place in which I discuss that stuff, but it felt very forced on my end, and then I didn't know how I felt about it after.
I mean, I totally get that. I feel like I remember feeling similar feelings around that time because one, I feel like in moments of like high emotion and crisis, it feels sometimes so trivial to do like a post where you're talking about, your own experience or whatnot. But at the same time, you would see that kind of like influx of positive response. And even if it was from people that, like you said, typically already know this stuff about you, already support you, sort of thing, it feels like, what am I really doing? But then you kind of remember that it is reaching more people than you think, you know? Yeah. Those are just the people who are going the extra step and like supporting you and vocalizing it. But it is really important in moments like that to speak up and participate and share your experience. Because I've had that too happen where like, whether it's a celebrity or a friend of mine say something and I'm like, oh, I didn't realize like you also kind of felt that way, or like, wow, that makes me feel like I didn't just go through that by myself, or I don't feel weird for having experienced that by myself.
So ultimately, it can be selfless, or you can be like, well,
I think so.
You're doing more good. You're just more of a net positive. You got to kind of remove yourself from it a little bit.
And I think it goes back to what I was saying of like, we were joking about the word platform and, various sizes of platforms. Like you and I have minimal platforms at best, I would say, compared to, celebrities and other people.
I don't even get off the ground, Val. They say no platform.
But at the same time, I do think what I was saying before about whatever size platform you have, you choose what you talk about. You choose what you say, like, this is who I am, or this is what I care about, and what I want to share with my friends and family, if that's just it. But I do think that's really important because, like, you don't have to, you don't have to share any of that. You could choose to talk only about, like, I don't know, superhero movies or basketball or whatever and just never talk about the rest of the stuff. But like if it's important enough for you where you want to share it and you feel strongly about it, then like I think that says a lot about how you treat your platform.
Yeah.
You know.
I think that's well said. I'm again, I'm not criticizing anyone for the decision that they make to share or not share anything, but that was just like one thing where, because like I always felt like, I always felt like the best representation, especially when we started, was just by being up there, and like not ever pointing to it. But I think things have changed, and I think I have to kind of like also identify that like unless you don't clearly communicate, is so much noise now. Like people have to like know it and hear it.
Yes.
And not just like you can't just expect that they're gonna see it.
And that's the thing. I feel like again, and this is a symptom of us getting older and being like this generation versus that generation. But I really do think that we have to remember that things have changed. Like you said, this is just kind of the state of things now. We have to accept that people, take personality really seriously when it comes to fame and art that they attach to and all that stuff. But then at the same time, I feel like the younger generation that is kind of perpetually online and like takes all that stuff really seriously also has to remember that like people make mistakes. It's not the internet is forever as when we grew up. Like that's how we felt. The internet is forever in some ways, but at the same time, like you can say something, realize you're wrong, change your mind, you can learn, you can get better the next time around sort of thing. And I feel like we've seen some of that happening, especially like in this new era of DJs with personalities saying things that are sometimes silly.
Yeah.
So I kind of feel like that's where I land. Again, it's not a good or a bad thing. It's just the state of how it is. And I feel like let's remember that dance music isn't so serious. But then at the same time, remember that like those with a platform, like you do have the ability to be serious. And maybe you should take some time and think about what you'd like to say.
That's
I
true.
think it is really important.
That's true. I mean, I just assume everyone has a ghost producer. And honestly, I just assume that like most people kind of suck. I'm not saying that to be funny. I actually just assume that because like, dude, like just people like personally, your own friends, like some of them aren't great people. Like, maybe
whoa,
not.
Whoa. Speak for yourself. All my friends are high caliber friends.
Some of my friends, Jose, some of my friends, like I don't think that they would maybe be the best to have a platform. They're not bad. They're not bad people.
For sure.
But like I don't know.
They're not bad people, but they shouldn't probably have a Twitter with 1 million followers.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's put it that way.
They're not gonna be firing off some like nice out of pocket morning affirmations.
Yeah, which is a great thing to realize for yourself.
Yeah,
I'll say that's a mature thing.
Like that's just not their place, and like that doesn't mean that they're so. I think the interesting demand that artists, it almost feels like the bar is so high to become a successful artist these days that we've almost found like, the most like razor thin criteria that you have to fit to, deserve a platform a lot of times. Or you could just be like the opposite and just be like the most inflammatory, the most controversial person, and you'll probably garner an audience, but like people will hate you. Like,
Yeah, and that's just again dependent on who you are and how thick your skin is. Also, of like, can you handle a bunch of people criticizing you or being mean to you on the internet? Some people can. Some people are down
people
for
wake
that,
up
but...
and it's just like we drink a latte,
Yeah, exactly. Some people wake up and are ready to start some beef.
I sort my Reddit by controversial.
Oh my gosh! Yeah.
So to end on this, so do you think that the separation of artist and art is possible? Or do you think that it's just kind of too blurred at this point?
I feel as though the current state, if I'm being totally realistic, I don't think it's really as possible to separate them. I feel like it used to be a little more viable. And I think, again, it's a scale. Some artists I think are better at it and have done a good job of distancing, this is my music or whatever it is, and then like I am who I am, and they kind of keep private for that reason. But I think the way things are now, internet, social media, the way people care about politics and what you put your brand behind, I feel like it is blurred, and I think you just have to be a smart fan, and also if you're a person who has a platform, like I was saying, like be smart about what you put out there, because I think every action you take of like whatever you want to say or share with people, like that's a choice. It's a conscious choice. So
yeah. Well, that's great. And my advice to all of you listening, do not look up to these DJs, please. None of them.
Oh my God.
None of them deserve any of your adoration, or they're no role models.
There's a couple. I'm here to keep things positive. Now that I've woken up, I'm chugging my latte, telling people that there are some people.
When some people zig, I always try to zag, you know? So like people are like, "Oh, that guy sucks." I'm like, "Oh no, he's such a mensch," you know?
Incredible.
I'm trying to kind of.
And you know what? That's your platform. That is your choice. So I respect that choice.
That's a good place, I think, to leave it now. But yeah, you know, it's a great time. Glad we have this little platform here.
I know. This one, exactly.
This one.
But you know what? If you're listening, if you made it all the way to the end of this episode too, like I'm curious to hear your thoughts. I'd love to know, because I know that everyone feels differently about
Send us
this
an
subject.
Email, all right?
Yeah, send us an email, hit us up on the comments and whatnot. But like, seriously, I love hearing people's thoughts on this, and I feel like you and I could talk about this for way longer, but we're not gonna.
No, we're not gonna. But
let me know your thoughts, though.
Shout out to Jose producing the show.
Yay.
And Yate for the cool bevies.
Very delicious.
Icon Collective Music Production School for having us.
And
hey, we'll see you in the next one.
See you next time.